Hello everybody and welcome to our podcast. You may have heard that interesting music at the very beginning. That's actually directly from the Zeta race, the Greys, and they provided that for us in a compressed audio stream on one of our devices. When we uncompressed it, it turned out to be the Close Encounters of the Third Kind music. When we asked them why, they said that they thought that we would find it amusing. These podcasts that we're putting together are designed to explain from our perspective, having contact with the race, what's going on and what's been going on and what's going to happen hopefully in the future as well. These will be a series of podcasts that will be created by myself and Cyan. And so this is podcast number 1.
This is the first question. This is something everybody asks. How long have you been a medium? How did you get into mediumship?
Okay, I've stumbled into mediumship. What I didn't understand was what was going on around me. So with seeing spirits my whole life, I had no idea what a medium was anyway. I thought initially that seeing these people was normal. It was only as I got older that I realised that the spirit people was something that others probably weren't seeing the way that I was seeing them. Even to the point that when I saw them walking down the street, I would walk around them because I thought that they were real. So a lot of people start off their mediumship by going, I started off doing tarot cards or psychic work or whatever.
Open circles and spiritualists.
Yeah, open circles, those sorts of things. But I didn't do it that way, and I didn't know what I was doing anyway. I didn't even know what a medium was.
Mm-hmm.
It was only when I started to work out that I had to confront what I was seeing that it then seemed to convert itself into mediumship.
So you're saying you see spirits walking around with your normal eyes, not the whole third eye thing, objective clairvoyance.
Right. Yeah, so that's called objective mediumship.
Yeah.
So of course, once that had started to develop, I then thought to myself that I should do some meditation to try to bring it under control, because the more I did, the worse it got. It was like having the TV on all the time, and then the volume kept going up, so there was no control.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another issue. But at the same time that was happening, all of the extraterrestrial stuff started to fire up as well. Now, of course, the underlying thread, I just want to go back for a minute. People call seeing spirits mediumship. And then, of course, people have now called contacting extraterrestrials some type of channeling or mediumship. But the reality is that it's actually none of those.
Mm-hmm.
So contacting extraterrestrials has got nothing to do with mediumship.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with channeling.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different ways that they contact people.
Mm-hmm.
They contact people via their dream states. They contact people via the astral states as well. They contact people via coming in craft and taking them on board craft. These areas have got nothing to do with mediumship. You can develop mediumship to try to contact these beings, but mediumship is never going to resolve your contact in all those different states. And that's the real issue. So for me, I had to work out how to try to contact them, but the mediumship's only ever been just a part of the contact.
Yeah.
It's never been the whole thing, and people talk about channeling and all these sorts of things. Yeah, sometimes the extraterrestrials speak through people, of course, just as spirit people do. But there's so many sides to this phenomenon. It's not just about that. And I know that there's books being written and information's come through, but it's like that. It becomes your life. Your life is becomes a reflection of that contact that you have with them. Mm-hmm. So mediumship is probably not a word that I would use.
Not for the extraterrestrials.
No,
but
never.
For spirits.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've developed as a physical medium as well, haven't you? People always want to know about the spirit work that you do as well as the ET work. That's
correct, yeah. So definitely with mediumship's been developing ever since the dawn of man, really. People contacting loved ones and but I think, as I said before, I think that the problem is people are trying to label extraterrestrial contact the same way that you would contact spirit people. It's got nothing to do with that. Mm-hmm. And while people believe that it does, they'll have spirits coming and pretending to be extraterrestrials.
Yeah. And that's another thing that we always get asked, isn't it? Is it the same process to contact spirits as it is to contact the Zeta that we work with?
No,
it's really not.
They're totally different.
Yeah.
Spirit people operate differently. They operate on wavelengths that are different to extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. They also come and evidence themselves in ways that relate to probably, you may have known somebody, or they may have had experiences that they can relay through a medium back to a loved one. The extraterrestrials can't do that. They've not been your grandmother or your grandfather, so that's another issue as well.
And so you've said there that some forms of ET contact are through dreams and through astral travelling, or through the astral realms. How do you experience contact with the Zeta?
Okay, so
because it's not through dreams.
When I said astral, what I meant was that if you're asleep, your consciousness is elevated out of your body, and some people would call that astral, and then your consciousness is connected to by those races, and they speak to you and you speak to them. Mm-hmm. So that's an astral connection. I don't have that phenomenon take place. Ever since they've taught me to go to them, I've been blocked from going into the astral realm, so I can't astral travel anymore. I'm not sure that I can accurately describe how I can contact them. But if you think about that, right now in this room, there's all of the TV channels that are playing, but we can't hear them because the device, the television's turned off. All of the phone calls that people are making on their mobile phones are also around us, but we can't hear them either because we don't have the specific phone number related to each of those phones. And that's the same with extraterrestrial contact. You need to know basically what phone number to dial to even get to somebody to speak to. I think the skull experiment also experienced that with the germanium crystal, that they had to dial into specific frequencies to get contact. Robin Foy mentioned that in his book, I believe.
That's probably another chat.
That's probably another chat, but the thing is developing into ways of communicating with extraterrestrials is probably something that's a lifelong pursuit. I think at the moment that with the whole UAP disclosure issue, people are trying to work out, well, if one craft in the sky to those craft, if they are piloted by somebody, how do we communicate with them? It may be that you're not able to communicate with these beings. That I don't know if people have actually considered that there may not be any communication. If they had wanted to communicate, they would have done so already, and they would have also done it in a way where they had probably spoken to a lot of people at once.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of can imagine yourself going to a new planet and seeing the indigenous race that's there to the planet. You're on a craft and you go to a planet and you watch what those beings are doing, and then of course you now have to work out how to speak to them. But you don't look like them, you don't sound like them, you don't know the language, and you've got to try to communicate. That's why the movie Arrival is such a good movie, because it deals with those concepts. That's, it's a very good movie, that one. So this is why when we talk about mediumship and contact and extraterrestrials, this is the big mistake that everybody makes, including myself, is that you can dial in to that number that they've been giving you, but it doesn't mean they're going to answer. That's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no guarantee that anyone's going to be speaking to humans at that point.
Mm. And of course everybody always wants to know about your craft encounters.
So my first craft encounter would have been when I was 5, when I found myself locked outside of my own house, standing on the front lawn, I don't know, even have any idea what time it was, but it was pitch black. Sort of me telling the sky that I wanted to go home, and how dare they, leave me trapped here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that a 5-year-old should even know what that means, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I did try to build a cardboard spaceship to get home,
I know.
because I was stranded here. Problem is it never flew. When I was 18, I was living in Melbourne in a 3-storey block of flats, and I was washing the dishes or something, and I was looking out the kitchen window, and all of a sudden a craft appeared. Now, remember back then there was no internet, so there wasn't anything.
What did it look like?
Well, it looked like a tic-tac.
Was it on its end, or was it?
No, it was horizontal, and so it was probably about 10 metres away from the window, but it was what people would say would be a cigar shape.
Yeah.
And so I called my mate over and said, can you see that? He said yes. And so we stood there and talked about it, and the thing is, you could actually see past the craft to the main road, because the block of flats was up near the main road, and we saw a car coming out, and we recognised the car as being our friends, and they drove probably under the craft, but to the point where they were at the end of the craft. So the craft must have been a lot longer than what I remember.
Mm.
They came up, running upstairs, pounding on the door, and we let them in, and they're screaming, "Did you see this? The spaceship or something?" I'm not sure what the words were. And the 4 of us, we ended up just standing there looking at this craft. That means the craft must have been there for at least 3 to 4 minutes at this point.
Mm.
Then the side went clear, and there was 2 extraterrestrial greys standing there, or the Zetas were standing there. And we're all standing there talking about that we're looking at aliens, although we'd never even seen a picture of a grey, because
There probably wasn't
there
one
wasn't
back then.
one probably that I'd ever seen back there. Computers didn't exist, and so Then all of a sudden the craft disappeared, and the four of us turned around all at the same time, walked into the lounge room, sat down and watched television, and completely ignored the fact that we just saw a craft. They'd actually given us a screen memory to not allow us to remember that we'd seen a craft.
Mm.
So
But you remember now.
it was only years later, and normally that's what happens with screen memories.
Mm.
Within 10 to 20 years they fade or slip or slide or whatever.
What colour was the craft?
The craft was white.
It was
like
white.
the one that they've seen on the Nimitz.
How big do you reckon it was, roughly?
It would have had to have been at least 8 to 10 metres long.
And what about the width?
Oh yeah,
Diameter?
yeah.
Across the middle?
So it would have been at least 4 metres
So it's quite small, really.
high.
Oh, 4 metres.
Yeah. So you've got, say, 8 to 10 metres wide
Yeah.
and 4 metres high. So this is a fairly
So it's
large
Quite
object.
a stubby looking thing.
Well, you can imagine if this room here was 10 metres long,
Mm.
add another 2 metres and add another metre to the top of here,
Mm.
that's how high it was. Even if it's small, you know, in regards to height, a bit smaller than that.
So if those Tic Tacs were around, how many years ago was that?
That was 20, 40, 45 years ago.
These Tic Tacs aren't new.
No, not at all.
Do you remember seeing it move? It was just static.
It's static because when they dematerialise, they shift from one frequency to the next to move out. And of course, if they dematerialise and they shift, then the consciousness of the beings has to move out of the containers that's on the craft, so that they're not damaged themselves.
And that's how they can move so fast.
And that's how they move so fast, is that the physical container dematerialises inside the craft with the craft,
Yeah.
so they're all in the same quantum state,
Yeah.
and then the consciousness is put back into the container once the craft is out of the dematerialised state.
Because that's the big question at the moment, isn't it? Okay, there's the UAPs or whatever they're calling them. They've accepted that. Now the question is, well, who's flying them?
Some craft are just drones.
And people are saying, well, how can they possibly have any occupants?
Well,
Because of the way they're moving.
that's right. So some craft don't even have occupants in them. They don't need to.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sphere technology, the orb technology, is used for scanning. The orb can be from as big as a tennis ball all the way up to, a metre. It's really up to the race as to what type of technology they're using. The Zetas and the Greys aren't the only ones that use orbs. There's a lot of races that use orbs, and the reason they do is because they know that humans don't feel threatened by orbs. And so if a human sees an orb, they go, "Oh, there's a spirit person," or "Wow,
most people think
look at that phenomenon."
Yeah.
And so from a threat perspective, orbs generally are a very non-threatening type device. Although they look as though they're translucent or they're transparent, they do hold or house a lot of technology in them as well. There's a lot of technology that exists that's generally unseen by humans.
So people always get the Zeta and spirit people a bit mixed up in their mind, don't they? They find it hard to accept that the Zetas are living, breathing, walking, talking kind of beings, living their own lives, doing their own thing.
So the reason that takes place is because they see the craft move in and out of states, and so they think that they're coming from an interdimensional state into a three-dimensional reality. But then they're not. They're coming from an interdimensional state. They're coming from a three-dimensional existence into an interdimensional state
Yeah.
to travel and then
Yeah.
to integrate themselves back into where they're arriving at. They move into a physical state. And so maybe that's just a misinterpretation of what people are seeing that makes people believe that the Greys or the Zetas are actually a non-corporeal race. But they're actually a physical race, and there's a lot of them as well. And so they're able to they're able to integrate themselves with a lot of technology, but the technology is based in consciousness as well. It's a whole other area.
Yeah.
So talking about craft, so a lot of the craft that are coming here, basically they're unmanned. If there's a second level of craft, the craft are unmanned but have containers in them, and the containers generally have the possibility to be hold consciousness, and so a projected consciousness then fills the container, and then the beings are able to fulfill a function on the craft once the craft is materialized. Of course, the question is, people would ask, well, what happens if they put humans on a craft and then travel? They can only travel below light speed with humans on craft, which means that for any type of journey, for a human to be taken anywhere, it's a difficult journey because the human can't remove their consciousness from their container, and so they can only travel at a specific speed and distance within a certain amount of time. So if you were going to be taken to the Zeta Reticulum, it would take 40 years for you to travel there.
Why can't they remove a person's consciousness from their container?
Where are they going to put it?
Well, they do that with their children, don't they?
Yeah, but they've got a specific consciousness that they are able to. It's different. It's malleable. It's understood.
So they don't understand the essentially the spirit consciousness well enough to be able to do that yet. That's a whole different.
There's a whole lot to this. So,
yeah.
you know, when we talk about consciousness being removed, where are they going to hold that consciousness? So, if a consciousness is in a container that's extraterrestrial, that consciousness has been transferred to that craft from a specific location. Now, if they want to travel and go through, say, a portal, they remove themselves from their containers and go back to their original container. The problem is with humans is that there's nowhere to place their consciousness. There's no capacity to place their consciousness somewhere for them to do the travelling.
So it's a long, slow journey back.
It's generally, well, that's why they put humans into stasis chambers and then travel, because there's no capacity to feed them, there's no capacity to toilet them,
No toilet.
there's no water, there's nothing aboard a craft that would support a human anyway.
No.
Yes, some humans are generally taken on craft and, shown things and all the rest of
But
it.
that's only for a short
But that's
while.
only for a short time, and then they're returned. And this comes back to the whole missing time question, compression, the compression of time. There's a lot of things that would need to be discussed.
And the whole empty container on the craft waiting to have the consciousness transferred to, that's led to a lot of misconceptions as well, hasn't it, about races of drone beings or races of dolls, they're known as, aren't they? Where people have misunderstood why those containers are.
Well, I think that what's happened is one, that people have seen the biological container and they've thought that the container is then just a marionette, like a puppet.
Yeah.
I guess in some respect you could actually say that, but the specific genetics related to that container is based on the specific entity's genetic requirements. So it's not some.
So it's not a random.
It's not some ad hoc process where they create a container, and it can be used by any consciousness. There would have to be some sort of biological process that the consciousness would lock itself into.
Like a link.
A link, yeah, a symbiotic process. The other one would be that people have probably seen human containers on craft, not realising that those containers are used in the same way that the grey or the Zeta containers are used, but they just generally look like they're sort of a bad copy of a human, because they use them sometimes to move in and out of human society.
That's probably another whole lot.
But that's a whole different, that's a whole other story as well.
So, everybody always asks, what have you done with all this information that's been given over the years? Because there's been a lot, hasn't there?
Yeah, so I'd suggest that probably about 20% of the information is in books, and there's 80% of information that's not.
Mm.
So the primer of the Zeta race is a scientific interpretation by William Trinity in regards to a lot of the information that he's been given, and also he's spoken to the Zetas as well through me. He's also had other experiences, as have other people. There's the alien interaction book that I wrote, which just sort of barely scratches the surface of the experience that I've had. There's the Zeta interviews, which is something like 400 or 500 pages, which is based on transcripts, but it's only really based on, it must be only a couple of hundred contacts. I'm not real sure. I know that there's been probably thousands of contacts, so there's a lot of information that's missing out of those books. And then the last book is called The Zeta Mind, which is like a handbook for contacting extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
So this is the real question. How do you take that 80% of information and put it into a book? It's just that, you'd keep going off into tangents. The contact is so incredibly complicated that we're only just scratching the surface of it. It's not what we think it is, and it's also not something that you can put into a formula.
No.
You can't say 1 + 1 = 2 with contact. It doesn't work that way. You could try to do the maths and come up with a different number every single time. That's the problem. And they've got it that way because at this point they're not wanting to ultimately disclose themselves in a way that humans would understand. There's no way that humans can, at this point, actually interact with them, and there are other races that do interact with humans, but specifically talking about the Zetas, because of the vibration that they hold and the local construct that people have, their mind, their consciousness, and what happens to them physically when they are in a conscious state and the extraterrestrials come. What happens to that person's mind? And that's the real issue. And that's why disclosure can't take place at this point.
So this brings us to the end of our first podcast. And next time we're going to be talking about a subject that we've been hearing a lot about at the moment, and that's the hybridization of the human race by the Greys. and so hopefully we'll get that done in the next week or so.